Welcome to the Kendrick Shope Show. Happy April. What the heck? Where did the first quarter go? I mean, like that, it has flown by. I am so excited to be here with you today. I'm excited to be here with you every Monday, but I'm really extra excited to be here with you today because I have Dr. Dionne Poulton with us today. And Dr. Dionne is a total boss. And I mean in every sense of the word. She has her PhD from the University of Georgia. She works with businesses. She kind of has the last line of defense, possibly right before they get sued when they've had a diversity issue, whether it's transgender, racial, gender in general, any kind of issue that has led to perhaps a not pleasant, that's a kind way of saying it, work environment. And they hire this boss lady to come in, and we're going to talk about what she does, how she does it. But one of the things that really caught my eye when I learned about Dr. Poulton was, think that you were an unbiased teacher, think again. And I thought, I've got to find out what this means. So Dr. Poulton also wrote a book called "It's Not Always Racist, but Sometimes It Is." And I'm going to be the white person who is brave enough to broach this subject because I want to learn. So Dr. Poulton, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Kendrick.
Yeah, it is my total pleasure. I want to jump right into this. So I'm going to confess, I'm nervous. I get nervous talking about racial issues because I never want to say something, and I'm going to make a confession as well. I never want to say something that is ignorant or that is perceived as racially insensitive, and I have done that before. So I'm going to make a confession. I'm going to piss somebody off, I guarantee you, but I, honest to God, did not know what I was saying. So I was pharmaceutical sales rep, Dr. Poulton, and I had an amazing manager. He's one of my dearest friends to this day. His name is Curtis Dorsey, African-American man. Love that man. And we were talking about something. I don't remember, maybe about how dark it had been in Chicago outside. Like, I don't remember exactly what we were talking about, but something about being dark. And I said, I made a comment that said, it's as dark as I don't even remember. I have stricken it from my vocabulary. Ace of spades or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And Curtis, and that may not have been exactly what I said, but Curtis said, Kendrick, that could be viewed as racist. And I was like, oh my God, how? Like, I thought I was the most racially sensitive person in the world. Mm-hmm. And yet here I was, said something I'd heard my whole life and didn't even realize. It's like when somebody says redheaded stepchild and I'm like, oh, that offends me. But I didn't know I was doing it. So it really opened. Curtis and I sat there. Curtis was so kind. He sat there with me for about an hour and a half, and we had a really frank discussion about things that I had no idea about. And it was fantastic. But I realized that it may not always be racist. My intent was never to be racist, yet sometimes it is. And so when I saw the title of your book, I was like, have to know more. So thank you for talking about this topic.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate you having me. And I'm so happy that you're able to have those kind of conversations with people. I think because that's pretty much my work. I try to facilitate dialogue, cross-cultural dialogue, intercultural dialogue, so people can get to know each other and really understand the meaning of humanity and reaching our humanity. Because ultimately, I think that's what counts. That should count more than anything else. And to your point, people make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes in terms of prejudgments, in terms of saying things, gaffes. So I appreciate you sharing that story.
Yeah, and I would have never said it had I known that it was offensive. Like I didn't even know. Like, that was a true case of ignorance. I realize it's not always a true case of ignorance, but in my case, I was like, I had no idea that was used to be or whatever. So tell us, you talk about the difference between racism and racial bias. Will you tell us what the difference is?
So put simply, racism it involves prejudice plus the abuse of power. So someone is prejudging. I'm prejudging you because you've got red hair, for example. Mm-hmm. And as a result, if I say I don't like anybody with red hair, I'm going to try and stifle you. That means if you try to go to work, I'm trying to keep you from getting a job. I'm going to withhold any kind of advantages towards you. So in terms of the context of racism towards a particular race, it's prejudging somebody and then stopping them from able to advance either socially, psychologically, and so on. So it's an active decision to withhold or stifle somebody because of something very superficial like prejudice.
Okay. And then racial bias.
And so bias is just a prejudgment. It is just looking at somebody and not necessarily being completely cognizant of what you're doing. So at any given time, the brain processes like a million bits of information at one time. But research says that of those millions, we can only really consciously process like 40 of them, which means that everything else gets kind of processed subconsciously. So which means that it's inevitable that we all, that's regardless of race, class, gender, age, whatever, we all can make mistakes in terms of our prejudgments because our brain is designed beautifully to make sense of the world, to make associations in order for us to actually make things understandable. But if we're not really cognizant of how we're perceiving somebody and most importantly, not attaching some kind of value to that person or devaluing that person based on how they look, that's when we get into trouble.
And so I'm curious about when does this, because this makes perfect sense to me. I'm no expert, but as I follow what you're saying, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. That's logical. So at what point do we begin to develop these biases? Do we develop them? Are we born with them? Do we learn them? Nature versus nurture, the whole discussion. But where does that come from?
So interesting. So naturally, as I said about the brain, our brain is that's just how it functions. Mm-hmm. And but if you couple that with society in terms of how things are set up, so there's something called critical race theory, and that's actually the theory that I use to the lens I look through with which to do my research. And critical race theory asserts that the world is based upon its race. It's all race is the preeminent issue that is present in any situation, that's eminent in any situation. So that's the lens that I look through. And I actually believe that because if you look at somebody who's older, like if I see you on the street and I'll say, okay, so from a distance, and someone says, describe her. I'll say, okay, she's a white lady, she's got red hair. And maybe you'd probably say, oh, she's a black lady with black hair or whatever. But to answer your question, when you look at children, they don't necessarily see the race of people. It takes them a while, and I've read where it's roughly around 10 years old is when they really start to see the differences in other people, and even then they still necessarily ascribe value to people. It's they see differences, but it's very innocent. So the goal is as adults to kind of go back to that where we're just like we're trying not to be judgmental and decide who somebody is or what they're worth based upon how they look.
You know, one of the things and I remember it was the most beautiful thing is when I realized that my daughter didn't see color. When she went to preschool in Chicago for the first time, and she was talking about all of the kids in her class, and never once did she use a descriptive word of describing the color of their skin. And I said, Blake, she doesn't see color. She just sees people. And if we could get back to that, what an amazing world it would be. And then, it was interesting. We actually in the gym stumbled upon an argument between two people, and race. I don't know what happened, but race was part of the issue. Someone was, I don't remember, and I remember her saying, "Mommy, what is a black person?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is what we want to bottle this and inject it into everybody, right? Like people are people. It would be fantastic to have that." So, and interestingly enough, we're reading a book now. She's 9 now. So obviously she's beginning to notice difference in skin colors. We're reading a book now called Stella by Starlight. Mm-hmm. And in that book, it takes place in 1932. And in that book, it talks about, I think it's a true story, it talks about the KKK. And it's recommended reading by her school, but she paused it and said, "What's the KKK?" And I said, "You know what? We were listening to it." I said, "Let mommy do a little bit of research on that. I'll come back to you on that because I don't even know how to, that's so far away from anything we teach, I don't know how to broach that subject. I literally had to look it up to see how to talk to her about it. Not that I want to keep her from our history as a country, but it's a sensitive topic.
That's pretty heavy. Yeah, that's pretty
heavy for 9. I about fell over. I wish they'd have warned me a little bit.
But can I just say one thing though, in terms of the seeing color? There's that you probably heard the notion of color blindness. Mm-hmm. And so the goal is not necessarily to be colorblind. The goal is to see that person's color, understand their plight, the circumstances in which people of color or whoever goes through in society, and saying, you know what, because you are a person of color, I see your color, but it doesn't matter to me. Yeah. And that's the goal versus I'm completely colorblind. Because if you say you're colorblind, that means that you're pretty much dismissing someone's part of their identity, which and many people actually are proud that they're a person of color or whatever. So just that the little copy, because a lot of people say that, and it actually goes against what the goal is, which is to
that makes perfect
work
sense.
Towards
So for all of the people listening or watching, what are some steps that we can take? Because again, I would say that I see color. I don't judge. People are people. But I also realize that there are learned biases that I may not even be aware of. Mm-hmm. And so, what are some first steps that we can take to be more loving, to be more accepting, to be more understanding, even if we're not aware that we have bias? Do we all have bias? I guess that's the first question. We all have bias, right?
We all do. We all do. And so again, we all have, if everybody has a brain, we all have biases. Go back to how I'd explained how we process information. So to answer your question, it's always good to be aware of, in any moment, be aware of how you're looking at people and how you're perceiving people. Another huge thing is to not substitute one context with another. And I'll share an example. So how I came to this whole area, I was teaching in Toronto, and I was teaching special education, and the class was majority Black boys, and it was probably 10th, 11th grade, and many of them couldn't write, and some of them couldn't read either. I was quite shocked. And then I moved to San Francisco and decided to get acclimated to the area and volunteered at an after-school program in a predominantly Black area. And I sat down with a young boy who's probably 10 years old, and started to kind of help him with tutoring. And I caught myself being surprised that he could read.
Wow.
And so it was a very profound moment, because here I am, I'm a Black woman, I'm married to a Black man, I come from a Black family, I've got a Black father, Black uncles, everything. So, and they can all read, but here I am, what I did was I transferred the learning that I got in Toronto in that small context and transferred it to San Francisco. So I made an assumption against that child, thinking he couldn't read, and that was an epiphany for me. So to go back to what I said, it's a matter of just being cognizant and be present as much as you can in the moment, and recognize, okay, this is a different situation, and so I'm going to walk into this situation, and it's going to be a very new thing for me. Even though things look familiar, people look familiar, and that person who did me wrong looks familiar to me, I'm going to be open. I'm going to be just be ready for anything to happen. Don't necessarily make a judgment before you get in there, and it's very difficult. But it's just being critically aware of your emotions, your feelings, and your prejudgments.
That makes sense. And I would say, and tell me if this is correct, but I would say that's a two-way street, right? I mean, I think back to that story with Curtis, and I mean, he could have, and rightfully so, been offended and thought, oh my gosh, this hick who is racist that I've got on my team, and it could have not worked out too well for me, and also been in a very uncomfortable situation for him. And so, but because he was honest and open and kind and caring, we had a great conversation. And it really, that moment changed my life. I became a voracious reader. I started consuming everything I could about what I believe, why I believe it, what I say, because he was willing to say, I'm not offended, I'm going to educate. Mm-hmm. And rightfully, he could have been offended. But it feels like he really gave me an opportunity that changed my life. And so maybe that prejudgment not prejudging goes both ways. Yes?
Absolutely. And to your point, and that's why actually in the book, I talk about intent, because you know somebody's heart. You can tell how someone says something to you and how they approach you. And if it's done innocently, we can tell who you are, Kendrick. We can tell you're not a bad person. So
I hope so.
I can't even see you getting mad, to be honest.
Oh, I do have the stereotypical fiery red temper. I do. We can stereotype me there. I got it.
You're a woman, right?
I am. Now, I say it with a Southern accent, so it's disguised, but yes. I got it.
I hear you. I hear you. So, but what I'm saying that one, and this is for everybody, in any, whether it's something related to race or gender, it's try not to be offended right away. It's stopping for a second and saying, okay, why is this person saying this? What was their intent? How am I receiving it? Do I have issues that are actually kind of what's the word? That's kind of distorting how it's being received. So there's so many things the factors that play into how we communicate with each other. So we have to just it's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing.
That's so hard. If somebody says something that offends you, like the immediately it offends you, it's really hard to stop and process and ask those questions. For me, I would think, oh my, like that's a learned behavior too. Like stop. Let's ask myself these qualifying questions before I react, right?
Yes. Yeah. There's a book, the author's name is escaping me right now, called The Four Agreements.
Oh, I've read it. Yeah. I can't remember the author either, but I've got it. Yeah.
Khalil Gibran, is it? I think.
I can't.
Anyway, but one of the things he says is don't take things personally.
Yeah.
And that's an agreement. Don't take things personally.
Yeah.
But if somebody intentionally tries to hurt you or offend you, then for sure, you got to speak up and defend yourself. But ultimately, you can say whatever you want to me. Just don't touch me.
Yeah. You can say whatever you want to me. Just look out when you start talking about my kid.
Oh yes. Yeah. Mama Bear will come right out. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. So I'm going to ask a politically loaded question, and Dr. Dionne and I have talked off air, so I'm comfortable. I'd be comfortable asking it anyway. But in today's society, where I feel like we are regressing around acceptance of all people, acceptance of diversity, besides just being aware, are there things that you think we need to do to correct the stupidity that's coming out of Washington?
Well, I got to tell you, I am encouraged. We're seeing more and more women running for office. We're seeing more minorities running for office. I was very encouraged. I was actually it was pretty cool to see, the incident that happened in Kentucky, and regardless of what your beliefs are, the gentleman that tried to get a marriage license and was denied. And that whole thing in the news with the lady, and now he's running for office against her. So it's those kind of things that I think are encouraging, regardless of what you think. My belief is, as I started the conversation, it's about humanity. And if someone is a human being, they are a human, which means I think that they deserve respect. They deserve the level of attention that everybody else has, and not disrespect. So that's a good thing for me. And again, as the women running for office, and then these millennials they are incredible. What they are doing,
unbelievable.
They are unbelievable. Like what they're doing with the marches. So I think definitely there is a concerted effort to kind of regress and to not make us value the contributions of women, the LGBT community, of minorities, immigrants. We've seen, but I really think that there's a lot of opposition, and I don't think that's going to win.
I would agree. I think that it's pretty uplifting to see the country rally together and stand up and be unwilling to accept, at least the people who are vocal about it and taking action, unwilling to accept the stuff that's happening. So tell me a little bit about your work. We've talked a lot about the book and about racism and about, the foundations for your work. Mm-hmm. But tell me about when you go into a business, what are some of the things that you do? You're like maybe one of the last steps. And so actually let's back up. Tell me what leads you to being called into a business. What has happened when they say, got to get the doctor on the phone?
So typically when I'm called in, it's after something major has happened. So either they don't necessarily, legally they can't necessarily disclose, but I gather that either they've been sued, or some higher up has said, you know what, you need to get some training in here. So typically what happens is I'll come in and more often than not, I have to customize workshops and talks that will address that particular issue that brought them to the point where they got in trouble, so to speak. So that's largely the bulk of my work, which is coming in to help clean up messes and to help people, as we're talking, as we've been saying, how do you actually reframe situations? How do you facilitate dialogue? How do you de-escalate situations and teach people how to de-escalate and teach people how to not be offended when stuff happens. Because, once you have people involved, there's always going to be someone's going to be offended all the time. But it's a matter of how do you really, really decipher if something is racist, if something is sexist, if something is really, really, done with ill intent. So that's pretty much what I do.
I would imagine that that's pretty hard, especially in a corporate environment. Like I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. I came from the corporate environment where I had a lot of opportunity. I loved my job, but overwhelmingly men were in charge and men were my boss, and that's okay. But I don't think I had one female boss in 15 plus years. And so some of that obviously is changing, but how do you teach people to de-escalate? Is it the same sort of stuff that you talked about here? Stop, ask yourself these questions about intent. What's the first few steps in de-escalation? Same thing?
Yeah, pretty much. It's being cognizant of your views, your perceptions, at the same time acknowledging that person's perceptions and their views and their intent. And it's also just deciding, that you make, basically it's a decision to find resolution. If you don't decide that I want resolution, you're not going to find resolution. And so it's a matter of trying to find that middle part, the middle ground, and it's a give and take. And that way you can really, really figure out, okay, what really happened here. And oftentimes when stuff happens, it's not even about that issue. It's about something else that happened like 15 years ago when I was offended, you did this. And it kind of just builds up. And then it becomes this huge issue.
Yeah, that makes sense. Kind of like a marriage.
Yes.
So if businesses are watching, CEOs, managers are watching or listening, and they're like, I don't want to get to the point where we have to call somebody in because we've been sued. Are there proactive steps that you would recommend that they take within their organization?
Absolutely. And actually ideally that should be the bulk of my work, but it's not. But that's what I do. So oftentimes in organizations and businesses, it's always mandated to show respect. What is respect? Like respect to you may be different from me. And so how do you actually teach respect? And so what I do is I help people operationalize their policies. So I talk about, for example, Fox News, and just randomly, and how they've been sued several times for sexual harassment. Are you telling me they've never had a sexual harassment policy? No one has done training? So which means that somehow there's some kind of disconnect between the theory and the practice and the implementation. So I help with the implementation aspect and how do you get ahead of the issues before they actually blow up and create situations.
It's brilliant. It's so needed. So needed in today's working corporate America, in today's world. I mean, just like you said, the brain's processing whatever you said, gazillions of pieces of information, or trying to, can only process 40 or so. And then I would imagine in a corporate environment, when you add multitasking to that, we process even less, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And then we've got titles.
Yeah.
We have, just there's so many things that we also know that's, sometimes the maturity level is not where it should be for some people as well. And that makes them extra vulnerable to get in trouble.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
And Dr. Dionne, you have daughters, right?
I do. I've got 2 daughters. They are 14 and 11.
Okay. So if you gave them one piece and one piece only of diversity advice to go out and be successful in the world, what would it be?
Be open.
Be open.
And I pretty much that's how I've taught them. Be open.
Yeah.
Open to everybody. Just be open. And when you're open, the angels that will come to you, and they can come in any form. So, and that's pretty much what I teach them.
And then on the flip side of that, and I don't want to end on this, but on the flip side of that, what about when you run into just an idiot, somebody who's mean, somebody who's not open, somebody who is just, wrong in their beliefs or their views or whatever, somebody who is racist, somebody who is sexist? How do you deal with that?
In the context of my job or the context of just everyday?
Every day. So what would you tell everyday people who are watching? They're like, okay, I'm going to take Dr. Dionne's advice to heart. I'm going to be open. I'm not going to prejudge. I'm going to try to get intent. And then they run into that idiot sexist out there who is 100% without a shadow of a doubt sexist. How do we deal with that person?
Well, I have to tell you that I am not in the business of trying to change minds, whether it's professionally or just in general. My job is to present information the best way possible, and people will eat it, so to speak, at that time, or they may take that food and store it in the freezer for 5 years, and then something will happen to them. They'll go back to the freezer and say, "Oh no, this is what she was talking about."
Got it.
And I've had people come back to me 5 years later after I've done a facilitation. Now I know what you're talking about. And so, to answer your question, people who behave that way, they often end up being put into situations that force them to change their minds.
Got it.
So if I react to that kind of person, I'm actually feeding into whatever stereotype they have. But if I treat them with kindness, I kill them with kindness, then they're going to say, you know what? Oh, they're surprised because I'm not acting in the stereotypical manner in which they expect me to do. So I really, bless you. I really don't spend energy on people like that. I don't.
I love it. What a beautiful philosophy for life. I think I've read, I don't know if this is true. I've read Josephine Bonaparte was one of the first people to say, kill them with kindness. And we talk about that all the time in this house. Just kill them with kindness. Kill them with kindness.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Behind these doors, we might say what we really think, but outside, kill them with kindness. Sometimes you need to vent, you know what I mean? But kill them with kindness. Kill them with kindness.
Exactly.
So for a business,
however, with a little caveat, back to the children, if you do it to my child, I will address you.
Yeah,
and that has happened before. Yeah. So, yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And they're not old enough to process. They need Mama Bear. They need Mama Bear to take up for them.
And they don't deserve that.
No.
They're so innocent. They don't deserve that kind of thing. So.
Absolutely. So if someone's watching, a business is watching and thinking, okay, we need to get ahead of these policies. Like we want to do this in our business. We want to have make sure that the ideal matches the policy, so to speak, and really create a harmonious workplace for our employees. What's the best way to contact you?
My website is Poulton Consulting Group, POULTON, consultinggroup.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn at Dr. Dionne Poulton. And so you can reach me there.
Fantastic. And we'll add that in the notes so everybody can see it as well. Dr. Poulton, thank you so much. Thank you for being willing to have this conversation with me. I learned so much from you being here. It's an honor.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Kendrick. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you. And if you're watching, you know what? Extend somebody some kindness today. Don't immediately jump the gun. Ask about intent and take what Dr. Poulton says to heart, because let me tell you, she's a brilliant woman. She's got so many degrees, I can't even list them all in her biography. So she's been studying this for a long time. So learn from the experts. I believe in you, and I believe in your business, and I believe in our ability to make the world a better place. Have a beautiful Monday.